The cafeteria at Jefferson High was more than just a place to eat. It was an arena, buzzing with energy, hierarchy, and invisible boundaries that everyone seemed to understand. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, bouncing their harsh glow off the waxed linoleum floors. The air was heavy with the smell of fries drowned in oil, ketchup packets torn open too quickly, and the faint tang of bleach from the morning mop. Students moved like currents in a river, loud, constant, and unstoppable. Trays clattered against the counter. Cash registers beeped rhythmically, and chairs screeched against the floor whenever someone shoved one back too far. Each clique claimed its territory with confidence. The athletes in the middle, loud and laughing. The cheerleaders by the soda machine, their ponytails sharp as exclamation points. The band kids closer to the windows, instruments leaning against backpacks. Nia Johnson knew her place wasn't in any of those circles. Her place was the corner. She carried her tray like it was a fragile glass sculpture. On it sat a slice of cafeteria pizza glistening with grease, a sweating carton of chocolate milk, and an apple rolling dangerously near the edge. She gripped it with both hands, moving carefully, her eyes fixed on the floor. Just get to the corner, she told herself. Don't trip. Don't bump into anyone. Don't get noticed. But someone always noticed. Look, here comes midnight, a girl's voice rang out, sharp as a whistle. The word hung in the air like smoke. Heads turned. Laughter erupted near the soda machine, where the cheerleaders sat in their perfect row. Their manicured fingers pointed as they leaned against one another, ponytails swishing. Nia's chest tightened. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She told herself not to react, not to stumble. Keep moving. Then another voice chimed in, louder, crueler. Careful, y'all. If the lights go out, we'll lose her. Too black to find in the dark. This time, the laughter spread like wildfire. Tables shook with giggles. Hands slapped against tabletops in rhythm. Even kids who hadn't heard the first insult laughed anyway, swept up in the tide of mockery. Each sound landed on Nia like stones. Her palms slickened against the tray. Her vision narrowed, the edges of the room blurring. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might drop everything. Food splattering across the floor, laughter doubling, humiliation permanent. Her nails dug into her skin. She gritted her teeth. One step, then another. Keep walking. She reached the corner, sliding into a chair beside the rattling vending machine. The tray hit the table with a dull thud. The pizza stared back at her. She stabbed at it with her fork, but couldn't chew. The word echoed inside her skull, repeating with every heartbeat. Midnight, midnight, midnight. Her cheeks burned. Tears threatened, but she swallowed them down. Not here. Not in front of them. Crying would only prove them right. She stared at her reflection, faintly warped in the shiny surface of the tray. She saw her skin, deep and rich, and instead of pride, she felt shame. The laughter still rang in her ears, even though the cafeteria had moved on. When the bell finally rang, chairs screeched back, trays clattered into bins, and students streamed out in clusters. A cheerleader glanced at her as she walked by, smirking knowingly. Nia stayed seated until the room emptied. Only then did she stand, moving slowly, shoulders heavy, and dump her untouched pizza into the trash. She walked out with her head bowed, the words still following her down the hall like an unwelcome shadow. That night the house was still. The only sounds came from the kitchen, where Nia's mother hummed softly while rinsing dishes, and from the faint buzz of the television in the living room, where her younger brother played video games too loudly. Nia sat on her bed with the door shut, her body curled into itself. The room smelled faintly of cocoa butter and laundry detergent, familiar scents that should have comforted her. Posters lined the walls. Beyoncé in shimmering gold, Serena Williams mid-swing, a Black Panther comic cover with Chalice standing tall. Her desk was cluttered with open notebooks, pencils, and a half-finished sketch she had abandoned weeks ago. But none of it gave her comfort. Not tonight. Her eyes drifted to the mirror. The reflection staring back was hers, but it felt like an enemy. Her skin, deep, rich brown, was the first thing she saw, the thing she couldn't escape. She thought of the cafeteria, the laughter, the word that clung to her like a second name, midnight. Her chest ached, heavy as if someone sat on it. Slowly, she slid off the bed and knelt on the floor. Her hands, trembling, reached under the frame. She felt around in the dark until her fingers brushed against cool plastic. She pulled it out. The jar! Its label was scratched and faded from being shoved and hidden so often, but the words were still legible. Skin brightening cream. She held it in her lap for a long moment, just staring. It wasn't the first time. She had bought it weeks ago from a small beauty supply store 2 blocks away. The memory was sharp, etched in shame. She remembered walking in, heart pounding, pretending to browse the aisles of hair gel and lip gloss until she finally reached the shelf lined with jars. She remembered the shopkeeper's eyes on her, quiet but knowing, and how her face burned as she placed the jar on the counter. No words were exchanged. He rang it up, slid it into a plastic bag, and she hurried home, holding it close like contraband. Now she unscrewed the lid. A chemical smell rushed out, sharp and bitter, stinging her nose. Her heart raced. Her body screamed to stop. But her hands moved anyway. She dipped 2 trembling fingers into the cream. It was thick and cold, almost oily. She smeared it across her cheeks. At first it tingled, then it burned. Her eyes watered. She pressed harder, as though she could rub away the color itself. "Just a little lighter," she whispered. "Just a little." She reached for her makeup bag, layering powder and foundation over the irritation, trying to even the redness. She leaned close to the mirror, squinting. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw someone new. Someone prettier. Someone who could walk into the cafeteria without laughter trailing behind her. She tilted her head this way and that, imagining how they would look at her differently. How maybe, just maybe, the word midnight would vanish. But the fantasy cracked almost immediately. The girl in the mirror still felt like a stranger. The makeup couldn't cover the burning beneath her skin, and it couldn't cover the shame pressing down on her. Tears welled. She blinked them back, furious at herself. Her hand shook as she screwed the lid back on and shoved the jar under the bed, as though bearing it could erase what she had just done. She climbed beneath her blanket, pulling it tight around her like armor. Her eyes burned for more than just the cream. She stared at the ceiling, wishing for sleep, but her mind refused to quiet. Every time she closed her eyes, the cafeteria appeared again. The voices replayed. The laughter echoed. The word midnight reverberated in her skull, each repetition heavier than the last. She turned onto her side, curling tighter, whispering into the dark. Just a little lighter. Just a little. But the darkness didn't answer. The blanket didn't protect. And sleep never came. The days began to blur together. Morning spilled into afternoon. Afternoons into nights. Nothing stood out anymore except the routine, school, whispers, the jar, and the journal she kept tucked under her pillow. At school, she moved like a ghost. She walked through hallways with her head down, books clutched tight against her chest. The laughter hadn't stopped. Sometimes it came sharp and direct, a joke launched across the hallway like a dart. Sometimes it was quieter, whispered behind her back, muffled behind hands, but she still heard it. She always heard it. At lunch, she ate quickly alone. Sometimes she didn't eat at all. Her appetite dulled, replaced by a knot in her stomach that never seemed to loosen. At home, the jar waited. Each night, she told herself she wouldn't touch it. Each night, she reached for it anyway. She would sit in front of the mirror, unscrew the lid, and smear the thick cream across her cheeks, her arms, sometimes even her hands. The burning was worse now. Her skin grew blotchy, irritated, red around the edges. Makeup stung when she applied it, but she pressed it in harder, desperate to smooth everything over. Her journal became the place where her secret spilled. page after page, filled with confessions she could never say aloud. I hate this skin. It's too dark, too heavy, too wrong. If I were lighter, maybe I'd finally be enough. I don't want to be me anymore. She wrote late into the night, her hand cramping, the ink smudging where her tears fell onto the page. Then she shoved the notebook back under her pillow, as though hiding the words could make them less true. Her grades slipped. Math problems blurred into meaningless numbers. English essays stayed half-finished, abandoned mid-sentence. Teachers started to notice. Mr. Alvarez, her English teacher, pulled her aside one afternoon. "Nia, are you okay?" he asked gently. "You're usually stronger with your writing than this." She nodded quickly, eyes on the floor. "I'm fine," she lied. He didn't look convinced, but he let her go. Even her body betrayed her. The cream left her arms raw, her cheeks blotched with uneven patches. Sometimes she caught classmates staring, their noses wrinkling slightly as if they could smell the chemicals clinging to her skin. Still, she told herself, beauty is pain. Beauty is pain. On Instagram, she found her escape. She brightened her selfies with filters until her skin glowed, several shades lighter. She scrolled back over them with a bittersweet ache. The girl in those pictures looked like someone else, someone worthy. When the likes came, little red hearts flashing on the screen, she felt a rush, a spark of validation. Comments like pretty or glow made her heart skip. For a moment, she believed them, but the moment never lasted. When the phone dimmed, the truth returned. She would catch her reflection in the black glass, her real skin staring back at her, and the hollow ache deepened. Her friendships suffered too. Keisha had invited her to sit at her table once, weeks ago, but Nia shook her head and walked away. She couldn't risk being seen, couldn't risk dragging someone else into her shame. Another time, Janelle texted her late at night, "You okay? Haven't seen you much." Nia stared at the screen, fingers hovering. She typed, "I'm fine," and hit send. Then she shut her phone off, the lie gnawing at her. She told herself it was easier this way, easier to be alone, easier not to let anyone close enough to see the truth. The spiral tightened around her, day after day, until it felt like she was drowning in silence. One night, after rubbing the cream into her cheeks until they stung, she leaned close to the mirror. The face staring back was red, uneven, tired. "Who are you?" she whispered. She didn't recognize herself anymore. Her eyes dropped to the jar in her hand. She pressed it against her chest, clutching it like a secret talisman. "This is the only way," she murmured. "The only way they'll ever stop laughing." The words tasted bitter, but she believed them. At least, she thought she did. Sleep came in fragments, short, restless stretches, punctuated by dreams where the cafeteria laughter echoed endlessly. She would wake with her heart pounding, the sheets twisted around her like chains. The spiral had no end in sight. Friday evening arrived with the smell of fried chicken and cornbread drifting through the Johnson house. Nia's mother was in the kitchen, pots clanging and gospel music humming low from the radio. The rhythm was warm, familiar, but Nia sat upstairs in her room, her stomach churning, unable to join in. The doorbell rang. Then came a burst of laughter that carried up the stairs, loud and bright, wrapping itself around the house like sunlight spilling through a window. Aunt Denise had arrived. She was the kind of woman who never entered a room quietly. She walked in wrapped in color. Today it was a long flowing skirt patterned in emerald and gold, a headwrap folded high like a crown. Gold hoops dangled from her ears, catching the light when she turned her head. Bracelets jingled as she hugged her sister, Nia's mother, and kissed her nephew's forehead. Her voice was honeyed, but strong, the kind that filled space easily without trying. "Lord, it smells good in here," she announced, fanning herself dramatically with a folded napkin she'd pulled from the counter. "Y'all gonna have to roll me out of this house if I eat everything." Everyone laughed. Everyone except Nia, who stayed upstairs, Her door cracked just enough to hear the sounds of joy drifting upward. "Where's my girl?" Denise asked after a moment, her tone softening. "In her room," Nia's mother said. "She's been quiet lately." Denise's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't press. Instead, she set her bags down, rolled up her sleeves, and joined in the cooking, filling the kitchen with her presence as naturally as breath. Later that night, after dinner, she climbed the stairs. Her steps were unhurried, certain, each one clicking softly against the wood. She knocked lightly on Nia's door. "Nia, baby, you in there?" Nia hesitated before answering. "Yeah." Denise pushed the door open gently. The room smelled faintly of cocoa butter and pencil shavings. The posters on the wall glowed dimly in the soft lamplight. Nia sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, her face half hidden. Denise smiled, though her eyes studied her niece closely. She walked in without waiting for an invitation and sat at the edge of the bed. Her bracelets jingled as she folded her hands in her lap. They sat in silence for a moment. Denise didn't rush. She simply looked around the room, her gaze settling finally on the bed frame. Her eyes sharpened, and then, with the certainty of someone who already knew, she leaned down, reached under, and pulled out the jar. It emerged from the shadows like Nia's a secret, breath caught, dragged into the light. Panic flared in her chest. "That's not Dash," she began, but the words broke off, too thin, too weak. Denise turned the jar slowly in her hands, studying the faded label. She didn't scold. She didn't gasp. She just held it. Her voice, when it came, was soft but firm. "So this the ghost you've been wrestling with?" Nia's throat tightened. Her eyes burned. Dash," she tried again, but the dam cracked. Words tumbled out before she could stop them. The cafeteria insults, the whispers, the laughter that wouldn't leave her head. The names, Midnight, Too Black. The sting of every giggle, every pointing finger. Her voice broke as she said, "I just wanted them to stop." Denise listened. She didn't interrupt. She let the flood pour out, her eyes steady, her presence unshakable. When Nia finally fell silent, trembling, Denise reached over and pulled her into her arms. "Oh, baby," she murmured, rocking her gently. "Don't think you're the first. Don't you ever think you're alone in this." She pulled back, rolled up her sleeve, and revealed a faint scar on her forearm. It was thin, pale, almost invisible, but it told a story. 1986, Denise said quietly. "I was 16. I took lemon juice and scrubbed my skin raw, thinking I could erase myself. Thought if I could just lighten up a little, boys would look at me different. Friends wouldn't call me burnt toast or tell me my nose was too wide. I cried myself to sleep so many nights." Nia's eyes widened. She had never imagined her bold, radiant aunt carrying scars like hers. "What changed?" she asked in a whisper. Denise's smile was soft, but her eyes shone with something fierce. "I learned my history. I stopped looking at myself through their eyes and started looking through my own. I found women who wore black like a crown. Angela Davis with her fist raised high. Cicely Tyson, regal on the screen. I read about queens who ruled kingdoms across Africa. I realized the world was wrong, not me. Baby, bleaching yourself won't stop the war. It'll just make you lose twice." She set the jar on the nightstand with deliberate care, as though disarming a weapon. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a leather-bound photo album. The cover was worn smooth, the edges frayed, but inside it was alive with history. Denise flipped the pages slowly, letting each image breathe. Queen Nzinga of Angola, regal and defiant, her gaze steady even through centuries. Harlem Renaissance women in satin gowns, dark skin glowing under stage lights. A young Maya Angelou, smiling boldly into the camera. Models from Ebony magazine, covers of the 1970s, their afros full and their skin radiant. Nia leaned closer with each turn. The images felt heavy, sacred, but also strangely familiar, as if pieces of herself had been hidden in these faces all along. Denise's voice was steady, carrying the rhythm of gospel. Your skin isn't something to fix. It's not a curse. It's a story. It's history. It's survival. It's a gift. Tears slid down Nia's cheeks. But for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of shame. Something flickered in her chest. Not a blaze. Not yet. But a spark. Denise closed the album gently and placed it in Nia's lap. This is yours to look through whenever you forget, she said. Because forgetting is what they want. But remembering? That's how we win. Nia traced her fingers over the cover. For a moment, the cafeteria laughter felt distant, muffled, almost powerless. She wasn't healed, not yet. But she wasn't alone either. And that made all the difference. The days after Aunt Denise's visit felt lighter, though the cafeteria hadn't changed. The laughter still echoed. The whispers still pricked at her ears. But something inside Nia had shifted. Not a complete transformation, but a seed planted. She found herself paying attention to others more closely. Not the cheerleaders, not the boys who smirked as she passed, but the quiet ones, the ones who carried their own shadows. That's how she noticed Keisha. Keisha was caramel-skinned with soft curls always tied back in a ponytail. She laughed easily, but Nia had seen the way she flinched when someone called her high yellow, as though her skin tone made her less authentic. Keisha hid behind smiles, but Nia recognized the hurt. Then there was Janelle, tall, brown-skinned, her braids swinging like ropes of pride. She carried a notebook everywhere, scribbling between classes. Once Nia caught a glimpse of the pages, lines of poetry, fierce and fragile. But Janelle never shared them aloud. And then there was Tori. Her albinism made her stand out in a different way. Pale skin, almost translucent lashes, eyes that caught the light strangely. People whispered about her too, sometimes cruelly, sometimes with false curiosity. Tori walked with her head high, but her solitude was obvious. One Tuesday, when the cafeteria noise felt unbearable, Nia carried her tray toward her usual corner. But this time, she found Keisha already sitting there, her own tray untouched. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Keisha slid her tray slightly to the side, making space. You can sit, she said quietly. Nia hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was understanding. Later that week, Janelle joined them, her notebook clutched to her chest. She didn't explain, just sat down, her braids brushing against her shoulder as she looked away from the stairs. By Friday, Tori appeared too. She didn't ask permission, just set her bag down and pulled out her sandwich. It wasn't planned. It just happened. For girls, drawn together by invisible threads of shared pain. At first, they said little. They just ate, side by side, the silence acting like a shield against the cafeteria noise. But slowly the words came. Keisha admitted, people act like being light-skinned makes me privileged. Maybe it does, but it also makes me a target. My cousins call me Banana Girl. Even my aunt says I'm not really black. Janelle whispered, my poems, most of them are about skin. I write about wanting to unzip myself and step into someone else's body for a day, just to know what it feels like not to be judged before I even speak. Tori's voice was steady when she said, people think albinism makes me less black, or they act like I'm a freak show. I've heard every joke, ghost powder, bleach baby. Sometimes I wish I could disappear completely. Nia listened. Then, slowly she opened her mouth. They call me Midnight, she said, her voice barely audible. Too dark, too black, like I'm something to laugh at. The table went quiet. For a heartbeat, Nia thought maybe she had said too much. But then Keisha reached across and touched her hand lightly. Then they're blind, she said simply. The words cracked something open. That day they made a vow. Not formal, not written, but sacred all the same. No judgment, no comparisons, No tearing each other down. They named themselves the Crown Collective. Every queen needs a crown, Denise had told her, and so they chose to wear theirs together. They started small. They wrote affirmations on sticky notes and tucked them into one another's lockers. You're enough. Your skin tells a story. Beautiful always. They met on weekends at the library, huddled in a corner with Janelle's notebook open wide. They wrote poems together, their voices weaving into a chorus. Some lines angry, some soft, all true. One Saturday, Denise joined them, teaching them how to tie head wraps. They laughed as fabric slipped and sagged. But when the wraps finally sat right, they looked at each other with awe. For the first time, Nia saw herself reflected in others, not as a target, but as part of something powerful. At school, things began to change. Not the cruelty that still lingered, but their response to it. One afternoon, a boy snickered, "Hey, bleach baby," at Tori as she walked past. Before she could flinch, Janelle turned, her voice sharp. "Say it again, and you'll be explaining yourself to all four of us." The boy blinked, startled, then slunk away. The cafeteria wasn't magically safe, but it wasn't a battlefield anymore either. Together, they were stronger. And for the first time, Nia didn't feel alone. February arrived with banners of red, green, and black taped to the school's hallways. Posters of Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Maya Angelou, and Malcolm X decorated bulletin boards. Teachers buzzed with reminders about the Black History Month assembly. When the announcement came over the loudspeaker that Nia Johnson would be delivering a speech, her stomach clenched so tightly she thought she might faint. She hadn't volunteered. It was Ms. Carter, the history teacher, who had quietly encouraged her. Say what you needed to hear when you were hurting. Someone else needs to hear it too. Now, standing backstage, Nia's palms were slick with sweat. Her knees trembled. The noise of the packed auditorium swelled beyond the curtain. Hundreds of students shuffling in seats, whispering, tapping on their phones. I can't do this, she thought. What if they laugh? What if they call me midnight right here, in front of everyone? She felt a familiar panic rising. For a heartbeat, she imagined running, slipping out the side door, vanishing into the hallway. But then she caught sight of her circle in the front row. Keisha, Janelle, and Tori sat shoulder to shoulder, their heads held high, their faces steady with quiet encouragement. And just behind them, Aunt Denise sat with her hands clasped, eyes glistening with pride. Denise's words echoed in her chest. Say what you needed to hear when you were hurting. Nia swallowed hard, stepped onto the stage, and walked toward the microphone. The auditorium hushed. She gripped the podium. Her voice shook at first, barely above a whisper. When I was younger, she began, I thought my skin was a punishment. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I thought it was the reason people laughed at me, the reason I was called names, the reason I felt invisible and too visible at the same time. Her voice gained strength with each word. I even tried to erase it. I tried to scrub it away, to lighten it, to make myself into someone else. But all I found was shame. The silence deepened. Even the rustling of papers, the tapping of feet stilled. She lifted her chin, her hands no longer trembling. But I've learned something. My skin is not a curse. It is not a mistake. It is not something to fix. My skin is a story. It is history painted on me. It carries the resilience of my ancestors, the beauty of queens, the power of voices that refuse to be silenced. Her words filled the auditorium like a tide rising. Every shade of black is beautiful, from the lightest caramel to the deepest midnight. Colorism divides us only if we let it, and I refuse to let it anymore. I am enough, skin deep and soul deep, and so are you. For a moment, there was only stillness, the kind of quiet that hangs right before a storm breaks. Then the applause came. It started with her friends, the Crown Collective rising to their feet, clapping through tears. Then it spread row by row until the entire auditorium thundered with sound. Some students stood, some whistled, some simply clapped with their eyes wide, as though they had never seen her before. On the side of the stage, Miss Carter wiped her eyes. In the back, Aunt Denise's smile shone like a beacon, pride radiating from her. And Nia, standing at the podium, felt something she had never felt in that school before. Power. She wasn't midnight. She wasn't invisible. She was a light. The week after the assembly, things didn't magically change. The whispers didn't vanish. A few snickers still echoed when she walked through the halls. But something was different. The words no longer cut as deep. They no longer had the power to define her. Because now, when she heard midnight, she thought of queens draped in crowns, of poets who turned pain into power, of her own voice steady at the microphone. Younger girls began approaching her in the hallways. One whispered, "Your speech, it made me feel like I belong." Another pressed a folded note into her hand. "Thank you. I thought I was the only one." The Crown Collective grew, stronger too. What began as 4 girls at a cafeteria table expanded. Others joined, sharing their stories, finding refuge in the circle. Their vow held true. No judgment, no comparisons, no tearing down. One quiet night, Nia pulled the jar out from under her bed one last time. She unscrewed the lid, stared at the thick cream inside. It no longer looked like salvation. It looked like poison. She carried it outside into the cool night air. The stars glittered above her, bright and untouchable. Kneeling by the garden, she poured the contents into the dirt. The cream oozed into the soil, swallowed by the earth. "Good riddance," she whispered. She dropped the empty jar into the trash and went back inside. Later, she stood before her mirror. No makeup, no filter, just herself. Her deep brown skin reflected richness, resilience, beauty. She whispered, then declared, "I am enough, skin deep and soul deep." And this time, she didn't dream of being lighter. She dreamed of being a light. Thanks for watching.